that's okay, why don't we proceed with the testimony? And why don't you, first of all, Representative Allen, if you'd like to introduce your bill. Thank you, Madam Chair. Members. I'll start with an overview here. House Bill 1904 creates a registry. I mean, under the current statute in 2007, this whole creation of the roster, the registry was set in motion in 2007 by the legislature, and then, and I'll explain that a little bit more, but that's, so this is, under that 2007 legislation, it directed the Department of Health to work with an advisory, a task force basically, to come up with regulations and to basically establish the registry. So this bill outlines the qualifications that are necessary to be included on the roster and registry, and establishes application and renewal fees for interpreters to be listed on the registry. This bill also outlines procedures for the Minnesota Department of Health to use when receiving and reviewing applications, and for imposing disciplinary action. And finally, the bill creates an advisory council and lists criteria for membership and tasks. And before we go further into how this actually works, I want to talk about the process. And Representative Allen, maybe this is a good time for me to pause, because I think we do have the amendment now that we can get the bill in the correct shape. So I have the A1 amendment. Do members have that? And I think it's, again, it's just an author's amendment. So Representative Allen is going to move the A1 amendment. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed, no. Motion prevails. So we got that out of the way, Representative Allen. So go ahead and leave. So I want to just reassure everyone that I don't take this bill lightly. So the legislature, I think everybody here would agree that that individuals should be permitted to enter a business profession unless there's an overwhelming need for the state to protect the interests of the public by restricting entry into the profession. And so we have here, I think in the materials that the proponents provided, there was an article trying to establish the potential harm or that the lack of regulation may cause or is causing. And really that is, the purpose of that is that they have to establish that there's a public interest here. So we have the proponents, we have the Department of Health, we have many legislators, people that are not necessarily, not all of them stakeholders, but they see a public interest that. So let me just mention a couple of criteria. So a business profession is generally only regulated by the state when the unregulated practice can clearly harm or endanger the health or safety or welfare of the public, or the potential harm is easily recognizable and not remote or dependent upon tenuous argument. This is not something, this is just an example. That generally, that's the process that we go through. And so the next criteria would be, for example, the public needs can reasonably be expected to benefit from an assurance of initial and continuing professional ability. Another criteria is the public cannot be effectively protected by other means in a more cost-beneficial manner. And so when we identify a need, when there's a public interest, then our job here is to make sure that the regulations adopted should be the least restrictive and at the same time consistent with the public. So we're balancing the least restrictive, and we weigh the costs and the benefits, and we're trying to protect the public interest. So that's the process here, and that's what our role is. That's how I see our role, is to go through that process and what criteria. I mean, there's probably, those of you who've been here longer than I am, there may be even a Minnesota statute that sets out criteria, but I didn't find that. But so that's the process, and there's a couple of proponents that will come up here and explain this since 2007. The group that worked on this with the Department of Health is the Interpreting Stakeholder Group. Now, this group it includes interpreters, education institutions, interpreter agencies, healthcare organizations, and other partners, and their goal was to help interpreters receive professional training and improve delivery of interpreter services in Minnesota. That was their objective. Now, we can, be critical of that process. Oftentimes, I give an example, we had recent redistricting. I mean, that pretty much set up, the next 10 years, for 10 years. In that process, it was, people were appointed to that, and everybody had a stake in that, but not everybody was aware of it, not everybody participated in it. And so a lot of people came, and when they found out that it was going to affect them, they came at the last minute, and the voice was heard, and they took it into consideration, but by then, sometimes it's already done. And so, but I want to reassure you that this process through the legislature here, this legislative process, you are here today, and so you're participating in that. And this bill is a work in progress. We still have a couple more weeks for the committee deadline, and then all the way to the floor if it gets that far. It can be amended, it can be worked on, and so I will continue to work with all the stakeholders, whether you're proponents, opponents, and continue to work on this. And so if you look at these two amendments, one is from the proponents, from the Interpreting Stakeholder Group. It was just some clarifying. They pushed out the dates. And then the other one I drafted after listening to many of you that had concerns about the bill, that are opposed to the bill, and so I put those in there so we have them all out on the table so that we can discuss them and I want to, I want to stress again that it's disturbing that some of the articles in the newspaper and that this whole process, and I think it's important that those are not intended to disparage your occupation or your profession or your standing in the community or because we know that you provide a valuable service. Many of you are new immigrants and you're contributing members to the community, and personally, the value, as Miriam lists, the language. In your language is your culture, and that is something that is invaluable, and that I hope that as you next generation, third generation, that you can keep that language, and so. At the same time, the public interest and the proponents will testify about how it's a difficult field, the medical terminology, the cultural differences, and so we can talk about those issues, and then the cost, the burden on you, so we weigh those interests, and many of you testify how this is going to be burdensome, and I am concerned about that because many of you live in the district I represent. And many of you are in areas that are economically depressed. Some of you have I consider disadvantaged businesses, and the last thing I want to see is that you be put out of business. And so I look at professionalizing an occupation or as something that can be a benefit to the practitioner. And so I have this vision of that. That when you're practice, your occupation is elevated, and this is something that you have some control over, and I'll explain that in a little bit with the advisory council. But so in a profession, so the only thing I know is in being an attorney. Well, we have certain requirements in state law. We have rules. But we have our own attorneys that are on the Minnesota State Bar that will adopt rules that govern our profession. We help each other with, we have, continuing legal education requirements, which, there'll be continuing education requirements in this bill. And so we help each other do that. And it is expensive, but there are ways that we help each other do that. We can do it if you're working for a nonprofit. We have reduced fees. If you teach a class, you get credit for it. And it is something that we look out for each other, and we are interested in our professionalism, our professional development, and so I would hope that you would look at this at some point, that it is you that are in some sense, in a big sense, regulating your own profession. And so that you decide, state law will impose certain minimum requirements, but I'm sorry, I'm just sort of getting carried away. Representative Allen, and you need to address the committee other than the audience, but I'm sorry. Maybe we can move to the testifiers, and I don't know, did you want to sort of tell the committee what's in the bill before we do that? I mean, I think I don't know what the public gets on this, but the members, in the bill sheet, it's pretty long, but basically it just sets up the purpose of the roster registry, and then the qualifications, which many of the testifiers will probably talk about. And so there's the 40-hour training, there's the English language proficiency, and there are certain proficiency tests regarding. So it is, and many of the interpreters will tell you that they're already getting the training, but this is some additional requirements. And then there's an application process, and then a renewal process. There's a fee. And then the advisory council is a 9-member advisory council. 3 of the members are going to be interpreters. 1 is going to be an agency. And then you have 4 positions where they're the hospitals, the insurers, and the educational institutions, the accredited institutions that provide the training. I think there's 4. So it's sort of like you're having the interpreters and the agency 4, and then you have the educational hospitals, and then you're going to have the 9th member is going to be a member of the public. And the public person is appointed by the Commissioner of Health, and there's a whole statute that governs that, and basically that person has to be free of any conflict of interest. They have to have no financial interest in the occupation or the hospitals, so this person is going to be truly independent. And so, and then the advisory council there's some of these requirements, some languages, there's no standardized training or testing for it. So the advisory council will make exemptions, they will provide alternate certifications for those languages where there is no written testing so the advisory council will have a lot of discretion in determining what the standards are, the qualifications, the requirements, but this is just the minimum requirements. So I can stop there and we can go to testimony. Okay, thank you, Representative Allen. So I just want to remind the testifiers, I know you've been each side, I know there's opposition, and we're going to have I think the people who are supporting the bill go first, and each side gets 10 minutes for all the speakers on each side, and then the committee, I'm sure, will have some questions. So let's get the first testifier, Shul Perez, if I'm pronouncing it right.
Yes, very well. Sure.
Thank you. And then Chi Vang. You might want to both come up, maybe. Chi Vang? Because you have 10 minutes between you to speak to the bill, and then the other side, where there are a lot more people, have 10 minutes. So we're going to be pretty strict on the time, and I do apologize that we're so short on time and that we are doing this so late in the evening, but we're on a short timeline, and we definitely want to hear from both sides on the bill. So I don't know if you've testified in committees before, but when you come up to testify, you need to just give us your name into the tape, and then you can just start to give us your testimony. Okay? So welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify in support of HF 1904. My name is Shul Perez Capistran, and I am the chair of the Interpreting Stakeholder Group, or ISG Advocacy Committee. I am also a certified medical Spanish interpreter. Since I began interpreting in Minnesota in September of 2009 as an independent contractor, I have heard time after time stories of frustration from patients and their relatives, as well as from providers that have received poor interpretation services. It was because of this experience that I became a member of ISG, and I wanted to collaborate with all the stakeholders to improve the situation of the medical interpreting field in Minnesota. As as an independent contractor who worked for several agencies in the Twin Cities, I found out that there was no consistent standard for practicing this important profession. For example, when I applied to work for an interpreting agency, the only test that I had to pass was to translate 100 medical-related words from English to Spanish and another 100 words from the Spanish to English. There was no oral proficiency language exam, nor an interpreting skill test. However, when I applied to work for another agency, I didn't have to translate any words, but I was required to pass an interpreting skills test. This lack of standardization has resulted in the entry of many unqualified interpreters into this field. To address this issue, ISG has worked over the past few years in collaboration with various stakeholders of the healthcare interpreting field, with interpreters, interpreting agencies, hospital systems, health plans, educational institutions, and with the Minnesota Department of Health. As a result of this joint effort, we are proposing this bill which establishes the practices and ethics for healthcare interpreters in Minnesota and the disciplinary actions for not complying with them. It also establishes the creation of a registry for qualified medical interpreters that have achieved a similar level to the national certification. Currently, national certification is available only in 7 languages through 2 national entities. Those interpreters who have already achieved that credential will be able to enter directly to the registry. However, for those interpreters in which there is no national certification available in their working languages, they will be able to enter the registry through training and testing that is similar to the training and testing required for the national certification. That is, they will have to prove proficiency in English and in each other working language by passing a test of spoken language proficiency. They will need to prove that they possess the cognitive skills to be able to interpret accurately by passing an interpreting skill test, and they will be required to complete a minimum of 40 hours of an interpreting training program. To promote a gradual transition into the registry, we are proposing to continue the continuation of the current roster, which is simply a listing of interpreters who have completed the roster application and paid the roster fee of the Minnesota Department of Health. However, we're adding the requirements of a criminal background check and a high school diploma or equivalent. As long as the interpreters who are currently in the roster comply with these requirements, they will be able to continue interpreting and receiving medical assistance reimbursement for their interpretation until they feel ready to make the investment of paying for the test and training that allow them to be in the registry. This will also avoid limiting patient access while interpreters get trained and tested to move up to the registry at their own pace. A verified interpreter registry will provide a mechanism to ensure that healthcare interpreters possess the specialized knowledge, levels, and skills to enable accurate and clear communication between patients and providers. This would result in saving healthcare dollars by decreasing the likelihood of negative outcomes, reducing the number of inpatient days and interventions, increasing the rate of treatment compliance, and preventing misunderstanding that can result in a wrong diagnosis or medication error. But most important than anything, this would protect vulnerable patients who are even more vulnerable by the fact that they are limited in their English language proficiency. For these reasons, I urge the committee to support the passage of HF 1904. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And Chi Vang, welcome to the committee. You want to pull the microphone, please. There you go.
Madam Chair.
Hello, Madam Chair.
No,
Today I'm here
tí là
I'm Chi Vang.
cô rong xe tôi chơi đồ cho
Very happy to be here to support the interpreters.
cô ye
I am
rong xe hay tiệc của tôi mà nói á cô tôi tự xóa hay tiệc cho là tôi bị lộ ra excuse me your chủ maybe the interpreter could be closer to the mic and then the speaker not as close. Thank you. Please proceed.
I am here because I want to voice that each interpreter is going to interpret for a family who has a family who is ill. It's in the hospital. When they're there, they should know how to communicate with the doctor. They should know how to interpret everything according to what the doctor says and according to what the family members says. They also must communicate that anytime the doctor tells the patient of their illness, that they must tell the family.
Okay, I'm sorry, people are having difficulty hearing. Okay, and also could the interpreter please give us your name?
Hello, Madam Chair. I am Chi Zhang. I am a volunteer Hmong interpreter.
Okay, and then so you're Chi Vong, and so who is the lady who's speaking?
I'm Chi Zhang.
Oh, I'm sorry, and please spell your last name for us.
IONG.
Okay, thank you, please continue, I'm sorry.
When the person is here to interpret for the family, that person cannot interpret for what the doctor is saying so that the family understands. They understand what the doctor is saying, but the interpreter is not interpreting everything correctly. Also, the family also addresses the doctor's concerns, and the interpreter is not able to address the concern. Only half of the concern is addressed. If it's like this, that person must have training so that that person knows that their interpreting skills, however they communicate to the doctor in English, how they're going to communicate it to the family so they understand. Some people, it's just not my community, but other communities as well. The parents or families who don't speak, they are afraid to speak. They understand that that person doesn't know how to interpret, but they know that they're limited in English, so they're afraid of the interpreter. They're afraid of the doctor. When they're angry, the anger just inside. They can't say anything. They get upset, they cry, and their tears just fall. But like me, like my father, they couldn't come in and interpret, so I had the right. I had the right to tell them that if they're here being paid, then they're not interpreting, then I have the right to refuse their services because they're not interpreting the exact same words that I'm saying, because I understand what the doctor is saying. Everybody here, I believe, that has that issue, but they're afraid. They're limited in their proficiency in English, so they don't say it. I want someone, when they interpret for us, that they know everything, that they understand everything, that they're able to interpret everything. What if I'm very ill? If I'm very ill and I have some intestine, what if they say that they don't know what my illness is? If that's the case, the interpreters must have training, they must have understanding. If I have something that I'm not saying, that person is telling, if my family member is very ill and they're going to pass away, and I tell the interpreter to tell the doctor to not communicate to the patient that the patient is going to die, and that for the doctor to only tell me and not to tell the patient, so that the patient is not so scared. But the interpreter even tells me that the interpreter can't say that to the doctor. The interpreter is only going to say what the doctor is saying to the patient. So if it's my family, then I am angry at the doctor. I'm angry at the interpreter. This is why I'm here. This is why I'm supporting this bill. This is why I'm interpreting. This is why I'm supporting the interpreters. I want them to be able to interpret from the family. It's just not for just me, but also for other ethnicities, for any family who come here who are limited in English.
All right, thank you very much for your testimony. Okay, thank you, we appreciate it. Thank you to the interpreter as well.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. I want to bring up this evening. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Katie Perez. I
I'm an RN with 12 years of experience in various hospital and clinic settings. I'm currently working at the Alina Health Clinic in Highland Park as a clinical services supervisor. As a supervisor, I'm passionate about ensuring that our patients are being cared for by the most qualified and professional individuals. Currently, we do not have a standardized way of determining the basic knowledge level of our interpreters. Unfortunately, this has caused a negative impact on our patients, providers, nurses, and various members of the health team. I had a patient come in with an interpreter for me to deliver an injectable medication. This was no ordinary med. It was a crucial treatment for his anemia. Unfortunately, no med is without side effects, and I needed to make an assessment of the patient in order to determine that it would be safe to proceed with the dose. I greeted the patient and mentioned my name, and that I would ask a few questions. I waited for the interpreter to interpret my greeting, and she did not say anything. I looked at her, and I asked that she tell him what I just said. She then replied, "Oh, he knows. We don't need to tell him." I questioned that in my mind, but then proceeded to ask the assessment questions. "Do you have any chest pain or shortness of breath right now?" I asked. The interpreter did not interpret any of my question, but replied to me, "No." "You didn't ask him," I said. "Could you please ask the patient the question?" The interpreter replied, "I know the answer is no." I then stated, "I am asking you to interpret my question to the patient. Does he have any chest pain or shortness of breath?" The interpreter sighed and then said something to the patient in their native language. The patient answered, and then the interpreter replied, "No." After much prodding, the interpreter completed the assessment with me and I was able to give the injection, but I questioned, did she really interpret what I said? Were the responses correct? I wish I could say that this was a one-time occurrence with only one interpreter, but unfortunately I've had this occur on multiple occasions, not just with medications, but when asking for patients' allergies, health histories, surgical histories, and various current symptoms. The interpreter would respond without asking the patient, stating that they knew all the answers. On another occasion, I was dosing a patient on Coumadin, a blood thinning medication. During these visits, I'd look at lab results and talk to the patient, listening very carefully to what is being said by the patient and their family, because their diet, alcohol usage, and other factors significantly impact how I dose them. On this visit, the patient and his wife were enthusiastically talking to each other about something in their native language. I asked the interpreter to tell me what they were saying. He mentioned, "Oh, it's nothing. It's not important." I replied, "I would like to know what they are saying because it is helpful in dosing the patient." The interpreter replied, "They are just arguing about him not taking his medication. It really doesn't matter." After further probing, I found out that the patient and his wife were discussing the very medication that I was dosing him on. It was a very important piece of information that was not being interpreted.
Could I ask you to wrap up, please?
Yes. After having multiple issues with various interpreters from various agencies, it is clear that we need regulation and a minimum standard to be set for this vital part of our health care today. I ask you to support this bill. Thank you.
All right, thank you very